presentation, I said, are you sure? You want a compensation person to talk about this topic, because this webinar is going to be a little bit compensation focused, as you can imagine. So they agreed to that. So today's presentation is going to be a little bit about overall organizational benchmarking, but then a whole lot about using that benchmarking data to make sure your pay programs are in shape, and also to make sure that you're paying your executives for the things you want them to do. So why benchmark? There's many reasons that you should benchmark your organizational performance as well as your compensation against the competitive labor market, or against your peers, or against your competitors. Number one is you want to identify best practices. We want to make sure that you have an awareness of best practices, especially in your industry. It can also help you conduct a performance gap analysis, figuring out, okay, well, where are my peers doing a little better than me? And what does that mean, and how can I improve it? Or where are my peers not as well off as me? And let me think through what I've been doing right and what I should be continuing to do in order to continue that trend. Benchmarking can help provide credible, objective insight. It can help you identify your strengths and weaknesses, and it can also help you identify employees that are most likely to leave because of pay. Of course, the overriding theme of the reason I was asked to present today is that the OCEC survey, the survey that's conducted annually, they're looking for you to participate right now. And I think that survey that I've had a chance to review, of course, as well, is just invaluable. I mean, people outside of your industry are craving the sort of data that you have readily available to you, and especially readily available to you if you participate. So today I'm going to take it the next step and say, okay, what if you participate? What if you have this information at your fingertips that you can use to compare yourself to other organizations, or compare your compensation to other organizations? How can we use that to maximize the value? And of course, benchmarking, one thing that I didn't say here, you need it also for financing activities, for valuation, for making sure that you're providing a fair return to your ownership. These are all the kind of things that survey in particular can help with. So why benchmark compensation in particular? According to a recent workforce and engagement survey, CFOs were asked their perception on why employees leave, and employees were asked their perception on the same. And the number one reason that employees leave you, that CFOs believe employees leave you, is because of inadequate salary and benefits. But even more, employees and CFOs say they're leaving you because of inadequate salary and benefits. So it's really important that we know, we identify ourselves as someone having inadequate, or on the flip side, identify ourselves as someone that is paying well above market, so that perhaps we can make some adjustments over time, save ourselves some money, or so that perhaps we can really advertise that to employees that we're trying to recruit. Hey, we pay more than market. We have proof that we pay more than market, but we want the best and brightest and most amazing talent, and here's the proof that we're willing to pay for it. In addition, salary is one of the largest operating expenses in any sort of organization. In durable goods manufacturing, it is 22% of every dollar that you spend on operating expenses. You want to make sure that you're being a good steward of those resources, that you are using 22 cents of every single dollar you spend for the best possible use, that you're focusing your payroll dollars on those employees that are most likely to leave because they're low paid and high performing. So now we're going to transition a little bit into using compensation data to implement a base pay program. So if you participate in the survey, you're going to have a whole lot of information. And what this section of my presentation talks about is how to use that information to design base pay programs. So the typical base pay system design steps are listed right here. And these aren't just theoretical steps. These are the same steps that I follow for projects, whether I'm working with a $100 million manufacturer, or a $1 billion services organization, or a $10 billion nonprofit. these are the same steps. These steps apply to all kinds of organizations and all kinds of sizes. Now, the data that you use and the information that backs up your compensation system is certainly going to be different organization to organization, but these overall steps can get you to a market competitive base pay program. So the first step is to determine your pay philosophy, your philosophy and plan. The purpose of a compensation system is to implement your compensation philosophy. So number one, you'd better figure out what your philosophy is. 85% of organizations nationwide choose a pay philosophy, that have a pay philosophy, choose to target their pay at the 50th percentile of the market. Now, that doesn't mean that they pay everyone at the 50th percentile, the 50th percentile being where half would pay more and half would pay less. That means that they develop their ranges around that market comparison point. Some organizations, of course, 15% do something different. So some of my clients say, we only want the best, the brightest, the most amazing talent, and we're willing to pay for it. So we're going to pay, our ranges are going to be focused upon the 65th or 75th percentiles. Some organizations say, we are such a great place to work. People love coming to work every day here. They love our free coffee, and we can get away with paying less. And so they might choose to pay the 40th percentile of the market. And mostly in this section, I'm focusing on base pay, but it's really important to think about what your philosophy is, not just on base pay, but on all components of compensation. So you could have a base pay program that does target pay below median. You could say, I'm going to target pay at the 40th percentile, but your total cash compensation philosophy, when you add base plus bonuses, could say, but in years where we perform, for the employees who perform, we're going to pay them well, and we're going to focus on 75th percentile total cash compensation. You can also have a benefits philosophy, a executive long-term incentive or perquisites philosophy. But overall, it's good to at least pick what you're trying to focus on. A compensation system can help ensure efficient allocation of resources. It can provide a rational basis for pay decisions. So once you have this sort of a system in place that's going to be backed up by the OCEC data or other data, once you have this sort of system in place, you're going to have a more rational basis for pay decisions. So when you're out trying to hire an employee, you're going to know it should be pretty market competitive if I pay this job between, $40,000 and $72,000, whatever the numbers may be. So no longer do you have to make pay decisions based upon, which manager yells the loudest, which employee brings a printout from the internet and lays it on your desk and says, I'm underpaid or I'm quitting. You're more proactively making pay decisions. And it can also assist supervisors in evaluating and rewarding performance. So you need to figure out how your employees perform and really identify your financial resources on those high-performing, low-paid employees. So the next step is to collect data. Collect data is pretty straightforward. This is to go to your payroll systems, figure out each employee's name, title, how much they're currently paid, how many hours they're working, what's their location, what's their work location, which division are they in, their title, all those sort of things, their most recent bonus that you're going to need in order to undertake this study. The other thing you're going to collect is your job documentation. And for some of you, you have really great, accurate, up-to-date job documentation that you know that you can rely upon. For others of you, you have nothing. I'm kind of a proponent of having no job documentation rather than bad job documentation. So you might be winning if you have nothing, but you're going to need something on which to conduct a pay study. So job documentation is going to dictate your market matches. So even when you get a survey, the OCE survey, any other survey, you're going to want to match to the survey based upon the roles and responsibilities of the positions in the survey. So you're going to need to understand what your employees do so that you can compare them to the published surveys. What you call a manufacturing technician 2 may be a senior manufacturing something in the survey. And so, I'm sorry, I can't pull that up right now. So anyway, the bottom line is you need to understand your positions, roles, and responsibilities so that you can determine the competitive position in the market for each of those. The next step is to actually go through and do the market pricing. What is market pricing? And this is where that survey is going to come in handy. Market pricing is the valuation of pay for jobs in the external labor markets in which you compete for talent. This can vary by every single position. It can vary by division or locations. It can vary job by job. So every single job, I really like to think of it in terms of replacement costs. If a particular position left today, what do I need to pay in order to recruit someone? If my employees were leaving, what sort of industry, what sort of location, what sort of size of company do I need to replace them from? And so that's how I like to look at pay data. I like to look at everything in terms of replacement costs. So the three key considerations are listed there. The first one's location. Some of your jobs, if they left tomorrow, you are going to conduct a local search for them. You know, if your receptionist sitting at the front door were to depart and you needed to replace them, very likely you'd conduct a local search to find that person. So I would expect that you would want to find local data or data at least geographically adjusted to your location in order to compare that position to the market. But if your chief manufacturing officer left tomorrow, of course, we might conduct a national or at least a regional search for that position. So we'd want to consider most likely national data, perhaps regional. Any sort of executive level position is actually going to expect to be paid the higher of local or national rates. So if you are a company operating in New York City, guess what? You're going to have to pay New York City pay rates, which are about 20% to 30% above the national average. If you are one of my clients in Mountain Home, Arkansas, where pay on average is about 10% below the national levels, you are going to need to pay national levels in order to recruit and retain good executive talent. Industry, of course, let's just keep beating those two positions to death. If your receptionist left tomorrow, you don't really care if he or she has, manufacturing experience, or if they don't. You're going to train them on the intricacies of your industry on those sort of roles and responsibilities. However, on the flip side, if your chief manufacturing officer left tomorrow, you want them not only to perhaps have manufacturing experience, but to have very specific experience in your exact sort of industry. And so you'd want to likewise find survey data that is reflective of that. And size of the organization, again, doesn't really matter for the receptionist because bigger companies don't pay their receptionists more, they hire more of them. But size certainly plays a role in market competitive executive compensation. Executives in $2 billion organizations get paid more than executives in $2 million organizations, as you can imagine. So at CBiz, we take selecting market data very seriously because we spend a whole lot of money on survey data. We spend $50,000 to $70,000 every year on survey data. So we always are looking at who responded. Are they similar to us in some way, shape, or form? What about the sample size? Is it significant enough to get a statistically valid respondent base? What about stable respondent base? So if a survey just dumps all of their participants and gets completely new participants year after year, you're not going to see trends in the data, or what you perceive as trends may just be because there was no stability in the respondent base. You want to make sure that the surveys are regularly conducted, that usually most organizations conduct surveys every year. Some do collect the data every 2 years or 3 years, depending upon the industry. But you want to make sure there's some regularity in how often they're conducted. And of course, the value, the cost-benefit analysis. Am I going to get enough value out of this data in order to use it? And the scrubbing methodology. And I can tell you, I looked at your specific survey that you have the opportunity to participate in, and it does meet all of these parameters, and especially the cost-benefit analysis. Simply by participating, you get the data that you need to develop a pay system like this right at your fingertips. So I'm pretty much all on board with that survey. Reliable data. Major consulting and surveying firms and trade associations are typically providers of good pay data. The data is statistically validated. There's a standard deviation analysis conducted to make sure that the results are valid. And reliable data would include the NTMA OCEC survey. So make sure that you are heavily considering participating in that. Unreliable data, I like to give these so that you have a little bit of ammunition when that employee comes in and lays a paper on your desk. The first example is self-reported data. So most of the free data that you can get out there on the internet is self-reported, which means theoretically an accounting clerk could go out there and say they're paid $1 million 500 times and affect the data. And so it's important to, well, I guess what I should say there is that the next time an employee comes in and lays a piece of paper on your desk and says, look, I'm underpaid, you say, Amber Duncan from CBiz with 15 years of compensation consulting experience says that is not reliable data. Unfortunately, there's some free data that's put out by the Department of Labor. It is also not statistically validated. It's collected by title, so it's generally not acceptable. And data from one or two competitors. Well, heck, that can be really reliable. It can also just be really illegal. So the great news is with the trade association, with NTMA acting as an intermediary and the consultant that conducts the data, the McKay Research Group, with them acting as an intermediary, you completely avoid this pitfall of collecting data because they're protecting you by collecting and aggregating the data and not divulging individual participant responses. Data from one or two competitors can be illegal. It's actually it would be against the Sherman Antitrust Act it can be considered a form of price setting. So let's say there's two widget makers in town and widget maker A's HR director calls up widget maker B's HR director and says, how much are you paying your widget makers? I've been paying mine $14.50 an hour. And widget maker B says, oh, wow, I've been paying mine $15.50 an hour. And they get together and they say, you know what? There is no other place in town for these widget makers to work. We're the only show. If they don't work for either of us, they don't have jobs. Let's get together here and let's agree we are going to pay widget makers $10 an hour or, $14.25 an hour, whatever it is. Well, all of a sudden they have set an artificial price cap on that compensation. And that is a form of price setting under the Sherman Antitrust Act. So you have to be really careful about that. And I know it sounds all theoretical and boy, that Sherman Antitrust Act, that's an old law. Do they actually still, do they actually still even apply that thing? Well, yes, they do. In fact, some very reputable or at least well-known companies well outside of your industry, the animation industry. So there are some animation companies in California, very recognizable, Pixar being one. And there is actually an email chain where different employees in multiple animation companies were going back and forth and saying, listen, I'm not going to hire your animators. Don't you hire mine. Well, the courts found that that was a form of price setting. So those employees were basically unemployable other than at their own employer. They weren't able to go across the street and get another animation job because the other animation companies wouldn't hire them. And that was considered a form of price setting. So yes, this law is very much in effect, very much being put to use even now. So the next step is to design a pay structure. So in the prior step, what you did was you went out to your survey resources, perhaps including the OCEC survey, and pulled data. Now we're going to use that data to design pay structures that we can use in our organization. So pay structures or salary structures, really what I'm talking about here isn't necessarily salary, it can be hourly, but it's the base pay for the employees. So the base pay structures are designed to allow flexibility while ensuring market competitiveness. Each salary grade is going to consist of a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum. The minimum is going to reflect attractive entry-level pay. The midpoint is typically going to be, I don't want you to just move employees to the midpoint, but it's typically going to be someone that's fully functioning in their job, a decent performer. The maximum, we're going to set it in such a way that it's going to be difficult to reach. The midpoint reflects your selected compensation philosophy. So if you select a base pay philosophy of 50th percentile, like 85% of other organizations in our country, then we want the midpoint to reflect the 50th percentile. If you select a comparison point of 75th, hey, we only want the best, the brightest, we're willing to pay for it, then we want the midpoint of your pay grades to reflect that 75th percentile number. The structures are not static. Once you design them, they need to be regularly updated to reflect market changes. So here's just a little example. We went to the market surveys. We found that our accounting specialist 2 at the market median or 50th percentile should be paid $35,455. We designed these 3 pay grades. We swapped that job into a pay grade 2 because that $35,455 is most close to the midpoint of pay grade 2. So it's most close to that $35,000 number than the 30 or the 40. So a pay structure is just a way for you to more easily make comparisons across your organization and to add consistency and, shall I say, fairness to your compensation decisions. So rather than having 100 positions and 100 different ways to pay those positions, we might have 100 positions and 10 different ways that we're going to pay our employees. Salary structure design encompasses 2 generally accepted compensation theories and methodologies, the first being range spread and the other being midpoint differential. So the midpoint is represented by the arrow right in the middle. That's going to be our market comparison point. So if we decided that when we looked at the surveys, we're going to compare ourselves to 50th, that should be about our midpoint. The minimum and maximum of our pay ranges are graphically depicted by the left and right sides of this funnel shape that I have here. So you can see, well, that it is a funnel, that those lines are closer together at the bottom than they are at the top. So the left and right side of my funnel, or the left and right side of my pay structure, because the left line represents the minimum, the right line represents the maximum. So you can see they're closer together at the bottom, and then they progressively get further and further apart. This is to recognize that an important component that really you recognize and pay every day. So whether an accounting clerk, this is going to sound a little harsh, whether an accounting clerk has been with your organization doing accounting clerking for 6 months, or if they've been there 20 years still doing the exact sort of account clerking. I like to use clerking as a verb, it cracks me up. Still doing the same sort of work, their relative value to the organization is relatively similar. So whether an accounting clerk has 1 year of experience or 20 years of experience, they should be paid differently, certainly, but they're not going to be paid significantly differently from each other. Their value to the organization is relatively similar. However, let's say on the other side of the accounting spectrum, or accounting finance side of your business, you need a new CFO. Well, you can promote that internally. You have a controller who's a really great controller, but they've never ever been a CFO before. You need to have the flexibility to pay that person and the value that they bring your organization as a CFO is going to be much, much lower than perhaps a CFO that you have to go out and hire externally, that maybe has turnaround experience in your industry, bringing another organization through a bankruptcy, and they just are the most amazing performer ever in the world of manufacturing CFO. Well, that person can bring a whole lot more value to your organization. So you need to have the flexibility higher up in your ranges to pay in a vastly different way, array of ways. The midpoint differential is the percentage, and so the range spread, I'm sorry if I didn't say this, is the percentage difference between the minimum and maximum of your pay grades. The midpoint differential is the percentage difference between each of your pay grades. So what's the percentage difference between a pay grade 1 to a pay grade 2? What's the percentage difference from a pay grade 12 to a pay grade 13? And you can see, again, that the ranges are represented by the horizontal lines. So you can see they're pretty close together at the bottom, and then they get further and further apart as you go up to the top of the structure. So at the bottom, what we're saying is it's a relatively small, it's a relatively small promotion to be promoted from die maker 1 to die maker 2. It's a really big promotion to be promoted from controller to CFO. And so we just want our pay ranges to reflect that strategy as well. Market-based pay is going to help ensure market relevance. It's going to be easy to administer, or at least easier than the flying by the seat of your pants methodology or the whoever screams the loudest methodology. It really gives you some data on which to be making pay decisions. And most importantly, it can help you focus your limited financial resources where they are most needed. So 22 cents of every single dollar in your industry that you spend is going towards pay. Let's make sure that we're spending it on those employees where it's going to have the greatest impact, and hold on to the people that we need to hold on to. And likewise, help us make decisions, perhaps when we have employees where it would be healthy to have some turnover. There's nothing like no pay increase to get someone to start thinking about finding another place to work. So the next step is to analyze your implementation costs. This is just to identify. So we've spent all this time developing these pay ranges. So at this point, we want to identify employees who are below the minimum of the ranges. We want to identify employees who are above the maximum. We want to conduct a comp ratio analysis where we compare each employee's pay to our new salary ranges that we designed. And so this is our recommendation for those employees below the minimum is going to be to come up with a strategy to get them to the minimum as soon as possible. For employees above the maximum, we do not normally recommend decreasing their pay. Our recommendation would be to decrease their opportunity for pay increases by either not giving them a pay increase, or if they're a good performer, maybe giving them a lump sum bonus in lieu of a pay increase. You can go through this entire process and you can have the best, most amazing designed pay system in the world, but it's not really ready to go until you consider internal equity. So everything we've talked about so far is really aligning you with market, aligning you with the markets in which you compete for talent, using the survey that the OCEC Survey, Operating Cost and Executive Compensation Survey, using the other survey data, using your experience with recruiting employees. All that is talking about the external labor markets in which you compete for talent. The next step is to make sure that it makes sense for your organization and how you value employees internally. I always say that you can go through this process and I would say for 90% of positions, maybe even 95, for some of my clients it's 97%, but for 90% or above of positions, you're going to feel pretty good about how the data compares and how positions compare to each other. But every now and then, you're just going to find some intricacies to the data that doesn't make sense for you. Okay, great. Thank you, OCE Survey, or thank you, CBiz, that you found that position A and position B should be paid similarly to each other. In our organization, we value position A more, and we're going to recognize that by moving it up a pay grade. That is a completely legitimate part of the process that needs to happen. So you need to look at positions compared to each other. You need to look at new hire rates compared to existing employees. Sometimes when you implement pay structures, you can create compression, or especially when you've had a lot of turnover, you've had to compete in the external labor market for talent and get it hired, and yet you've kind of been keeping your long-term employees stagnant in the pay ranges. That's something really to think about and move over time. And you also want to look at employees' positioning in the range based upon experience, their performance, et cetera. So if you have some really experienced, high-performing employees at the bottom of the pay range, I am in no way suggesting that you just move them to the top of the pay range. But if your overall average pay increase is 3%, I wouldn't give them 3%. I'd give them 5% or 6% or whatever you can afford in order to accelerate that employee through their pay ranges. So the next step is policies and procedures. You need something to back up the system. Here's just a list of the typical policies and procedures that are going to back up such a system. Next step is to implement, to put these pay ranges out there, to use them. I say out there, I didn't necessarily mean that. Some organizations use these pay ranges kind of in the background in order to make decisions. They provide them to managers kind of on a need-to-know basis. Okay, you're hiring this job. Here's the pay range that we suggest for the job. Some organizations are absolutely transparent and every employee knows their pay range and how they're paid in their pay range. I think that that can be a little problematic because no one ever feels good about pay. In fact, it's statistically proven. When researchers conduct employee satisfaction surveys, it's very rare to find an organization where people are happy about pay. They're usually just satisfied or not satisfied. No one would ever admit to being happy about their base pay. They want more. And then, of course, in order to implement, you're going to look at your competitive position. So this organization, they went through this entire study, and their grand total average overall compa ratio, thus dividing each employee's actual pay by the market, is 97.8%. And so what that means is that they're doing a pretty good job of implementing their pay philosophy. They're 100% would say they were perfectly implemented. But what's interesting is when you start looking at those ratios by department. So for some reason, our IT department's paid 115.6%. That's neither good nor bad. That could mean that we have a really experienced IT department with high performers, and they've progressed through their pay ranges by staying here quite a while. Or it could mean they're the ones that come in with printouts from the internet and say, hey, look, I'm underpaid repeatedly. It could be the ones that scream the loudest. Accounting's low. Is that because they're is that because we have a lesser experienced accounting department, or are they just low and we need to focus some resources there? So it's definitely important to slice and dice the data and look at it and update the system periodically. Don't leave your ranges stagnant. Don't go through all this work and leave them there. Update your system periodically. You can do so by applying a structure update percentage and then also comparing yourself to your OCEC survey or other surveys for compensation totals as well. So now I want to take it a step further. In the OCEC survey, you are given all kinds of information about organizational performance and how you compare, as well as total cash compensation information. So let's pull it together and do something with it. So in this section, I'm going to talk about aligning incentives with organizational performance. So variable pay is compensation that is contingent on discretion, performance, or results achieved. This is our typical annual bonus. More than 80% of U.S. organizations provide some form of short-term variable compensation, and over 50% have at least one long-term incentive plan. So long-term incentive plan would be long-term incentive plan would be more of like an executive plan, usually for 3 years or more of performance. And so it's going to be things like the stock options or phantom stock, things like that. Variable pay encompasses both short-term variable compensation, i.e. bonuses, and long-term incentives. So I'm sorry, I did focus a little bit on annual incentives when I described variable pay. But there's several considerations you should undertake when developing an annual incentive plan. And first and foremost, just like on the base pay design, it's your compensation philosophy. How do you want to pay compared to the market in terms of bonus compensation? You want to plan your purpose and objectives. Why are you putting in place such a plan? You want to make sure that you're really focusing these sort of plans on employees with the ability to influence results. Your C team, your VPs, your directors, they are going to influence organizational results and should probably have a bonus that's tied to that. Employees maybe below that, some do, some don't, but a lot of times they don't see their direct line correlation to how they can impact and influence overall organizational results. So you can still have a bonus for them. It should just be more so maybe some sort of production bonus or a safety bonus or a bonus that's very individualized to them. Hey, I'm going to pay you $3,000 this year, but you have to do A, B, and C, and you have to do them at a sufficient level. That does align with bigger, broader organizational goals. That can be a very effective way to implement incentives. You also want to consider the job function and level. I guess I got into that a little bit there when I started talking about the ability to influence results. But you also want to consider the market competitiveness of incentive awards. Again, this is going out to your published survey data and figuring out what other organizations are paying and how do you want to compare to that data. And then, of course, you need to figure out what your incentive type and value is going to be. So the pay mix, I think, is interesting to think about. For non-executive talent, there needs to be a much more heavy focus on base pay and benefits, as you can imagine. Annual incentives would make up a smaller component of a non-executive compensation package. But for executives, we definitely want to consider the fact that long-term incentives can make up a big portion of their compensation package. Benefits and perquisites are kind of minor. Base pay and annual incentives are about 25% each as well. So you just kind of have to look at incentives a little differently when you're looking at a higher level employee versus a lower level. The other thing I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, whenever I say something about a safety bonus or a production bonus, what I'm talking about is bonuses for your non-exempt employees. You have to be very careful when providing bonuses to non-exempt employees. And I know there is quite a trend in your particular industry to bonus those sort of positions. But sometimes the administrative burden of it can be less valuable than what you're getting out of the bonus. And sometimes those employees as well can really value, 50 cents more an hour than they value an end of the year bonus. And when I say the administrative burden, the big thing that you have to be careful with when you're doing those sort of bonus programs is retroactive overtime. So if you pay a non-exempt employee a bonus, you owe them retroactive overtime on that bonus. It's a very complicated calculation, but it can be done. It's just basically saying what the Department of Labor is trying to do in requiring you to retroactively pay overtime on the bonus. What they're trying to do is protect the employee from an employer who, here's the worst case scenario. The employer says, listen, I'm going to pay you minimum wage. And I'm going to give you time and a half on minimum wage for every hour that you work over 40 in a work week or over 8 hours in a day in California and certain jurisdictions. I'm going to pay you time and a half on that. Let's say your minimum wage is $8.50. I'm going to pay you time and a half on that. And then every year at the end of the year, I'm going to give you a $20,000 bonus. So what the employer is doing is keeping their hourly fixed rates low, and so that's what's illegal. What you have to do is pay retroactive overtime on any bonuses provided to non-exempt employees. And if anyone wants to talk about that further, I could talk about that all day and provide you examples, and feel free to email me for more information or call me. So performance measures, you need to think about corporate versus individual and qualitative versus quantitative. So corporate performance measures are going to be things like overall organizational performance measures. We want more revenue this year, and we want, $175 million in revenue. We want 10 million in revenue, whatever it may be. Setting those sort of goals, or profit goals, could be, operational goals. Individual goals are goals that you set, just like it sounds, for employees. So employee A, if you implement the software system and do a really good job with it this year, we're going to provide you a bonus. I've provided, this is just an example, this is most likely not going to work for you, but I provided just an overall example of what a bonus program might look like. So I provided the job level, the recommended target bonus or payout as a % of base pay, and then the amount that should be based upon corporate or individual goals. So for a chief level position, in this example, the recommended target is 40% of base pay. This executive is going to be paid 100% of their bonus based upon how the overall organization does. That makes a lot of sense. They have a direct line correlation to how the organization does. But then you can see that the bonus, and this is typically tied to market data, is lower as you go down the organization. Likewise, the goals become more and more individually based when you start talking about lower level employees. You want everyone to have a line of sight to the goals that you're setting. You want them to feel like they have some sort of control over whether or not they get paid a bonus. And that, if you're going to have a bonus program, you want the employees to feel tied to it, not just like it's a windfall. I think a lot of organizations make the mistake of just providing an overall percentage of base pay to everyone. And it feels like a windfall to employees who don't know what they did to earn it. And it feels like not very good to employees who absolutely earned it for the organization, but maybe aren't getting rewarded at the level that they deserve. When setting financial performance measures, that OCEC individualized report that you can get for free by participating in the survey can be invaluable in setting those financial performance measures. Now, I'm not saying that you should always set relative performance measures, but you could. You could go to the survey and say, listen, we're really lagging behind our entire industry in this one particular measure. We want to do better for it in this measure, and if we do it, we're going to pay for it. Examples might be sales growth or profitability. The really interesting thing about the report that I saw was that high profit companies are broken out from the rest of us, I guess you might say. And so you can actually look at yourself and how you compare to the average organization, how you compare to the high profit organization, and maybe you can start making some logic, you can start putting some logic and reason behind things that you want to see improved at your organization, and start setting some goals that tie to incentives for your executives. You can also set goals based upon what you did last year. You can set goals, based upon what you want to accomplish this year. But it's also extremely helpful to have that survey data at your fingertips that can show you how you compare and where improvements could help drive the organization forward. You can also set corporate customer satisfaction goals that can be through product development or promotion or customer feedback, process improvement goals. But typically, you should only have 2 to 5 corporate measures that you're measuring employees on. What I don't want to see in your incentive plan is every employee being measured on every job function. Goals should be just that. They should be goals. They should be 2 to 5, sorry, I don't want to contradict my own slide here, 2 to 5 things that you want the company to accomplish this year, and then you align that with what you're willing to pay the employees for doing it. Financial performance measures do change over the life cycle of the company. You know, companies that are new in the development stage, it doesn't necessarily mean you're new. You can be a 100-year-old company and have gone back to the development stage. They're mostly focused upon things like revenue growth or raising capital. Companies that are in true growth mode, again, would still be focused upon revenue growth, but might also start putting in profitability or cash flow or return measures. Mature companies and companies in the decline, as you can imagine, your performance measures on which you manage organizational performance can be different over time. In addition, don't forget that the OCEC survey is going to help you set goals that are reasonable in your industry. So, you know, there were a couple of years where manufacturing was absolutely down. And so and profits in manufacturing were down. So let's say that, you know, you set a goal of having a 10% profit. Well, if the rest of the organizations in your industry are having bad years and having negative 5% profit, you know, a negative 2% goal can actually be a something on which you might incentivize executives. Hey, we don't want you to be negative 5%. We want you to be negative 2%, so that we're starting to move towards positive territory. And sometimes it is necessary to incentivize executives on being less negative than maybe they have been in the past, or less negative on profit compared to a peer group. So there's also, like I mentioned before, you might set individual performance measures as well. Those can be things like production, quality, customer service, job performance. You can also set team or department measures. The bottom line is, with performance measures, you want the employees to feel aligned with them. The award amounts should reflect your total compensation philosophy. Who do you want to attract employees from? Who do you lose them to? That's the market. How should your organization compare to that market? And incentive awards amounts should be aligned with the market. So compensation surveys, again, like your OCEC survey, are going to help you figure out what is that market, and you know, how do I compare? Communication is critical. You definitely need to, once you've spent all this time designing such a plan like this, you definitely need to make sure it's communicated well to your employees. Performance measures, it's best practice to establish those prior to the beginning of the performance period. So if you are wanting to pay out bonuses at the end of this year, you'd better get busy and get some plans in place and get some goals in place. I like to see goals. Of course, I would ideally like to see goals as soon as possible at the beginning of a fiscal year. A lot of times you need to wait on prior year results before you can make good decisions on those. But now is certainly the time to be getting those in place. If not, best practice would be to start thinking about those goals towards the end of your prior fiscal year. You want to share your progress towards the goals frequently and provide periodic feedback on individual performance, and of course, announce the results in advance of the awards. So you have the opportunity, I know I've talked about the survey several times during this presentation, you have the opportunity to participate in the 2017 Operating Costs and Executive Compensation Survey sponsored by NTMA, and your responses are due by April 30th. And if you respond to the survey, you get a free copy of the Operating Costs and Executive Compensation Survey results. You also are eligible, you have to check the box and say yes and give a little more information, but you're eligible to get a free individualized financial performance report that is going to help you quickly see how you compare to your peers in the industry. And I will tell you that the type of information that I see in that survey is the type of information that organizations in other industries would just drool over. They only wish they could have that sort of information for their industry, but it doesn't exist in every industry. It exists in yours, and if you participate, you can get it for free. That's a pretty good opportunity. And if you don't participate, you can still buy it for a very reasonable cost. So I'm going to open the floor for questions. Feel free to put in questions in the chat box. And also, here's my complete contact information. Feel free to call me if you decide to start implementing a compensation program and get stuck. I'm happy to answer questions. And there's my phone number and my email address. And I just want to thank everyone again for attending today's webinar, Best Practices in Benchmarking. Pam, I am not seeing any questions. Are you? Okay, well, I guess that ends today's webinar. I am sorry if you were unable to put in any questions, but I don't see any. So if you have any, by all means, copy them and put them in email, and I will answer them that way. But otherwise, thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar, Best Practices in Benchmarking, using data to compare organizational performance and align pay with performance. We truly appreciate your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber. Have a great day.